Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines across the continent. In South Africa, a final sweep appeared to show nobody was left underground at Stilfontein gold mine. Earlier this week, at least 78 bodies and more than 200 miners were lifted out. Hundreds of civilians working for a French military base in Senegal expressed their concern after President Bassirou Diomaye Faye says the French army has to go to keep in line with his policy of independence and sovereignty. Is Kenya, a country of world-class athletes, up to the task of hosting the African Nations Championships? We'll get you some of the answers. It was a final sweep. Rescuers retrieving illegal miners from a disused South African gold shaft said on Thursday nobody was left underground. 78 bodies and more than 240 miners were lifted out this week, raising more questions on the fate and living conditions of these illegal communities. Laurent Berstecher has more.
A final sweep to make sure nobody's left behind before calling an end to rescue operations. Equipped with microphones, cameras and sensors, the red cage was lowered one last time inside Stilfontein's number 11 mine shaft before coming up empty.
So we went down to the level, we stopped the cage and we scanned with the cameras. We couldn't see any person still left behind and we couldn't hear any voices on the recording as well.
Over 240 people and nearly 80 corpses have been lifted out of the mine since rescue operations kicked off on Monday. A grim figure that's cast a shadow over the months-long police operation to crack down on illegal mining. South Africa's decision in November to restrict food and water supplies in an attempt to smoke out the miners sparked national outrage and helped shed light on the harrowing living conditions facing these communities. Often hailing from abroad and without proper documentation, they descend into abandoned mine shafts in hopes of finding gold and sometimes stay underground for months at a time. Treated as criminals by the government, many are now calling on authorities to allow them to work legally in South Africa.
They should make a way for us to work here. I don't want to be a criminal. I don't want to steal some people's property or to rob people.
Despite pressure by courts and activists, South African authorities appear determined to press on with the crackdown. Police on Thursday said Operation Close the Hole would continue as long as illegal mining persisted in the region.
So what can South Africa learn from this? What should the government do to avoid similar incidents? We talked earlier today to Sabelo Mnguni. He's the National Administrator for advocacy group MACWA, that stands for Mining Affected Communities United in Action. Let's listen.
So in South Africa, we've got what we call the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. It's a legislation that regulates how mining companies should conduct their businesses. What happens is mining companies, once they cease to operate or once they've taken all the mineral that they need, they leave communities in a bad situation where they demolish all the buildings they've built, they retrench every worker that they have. The MPRDA, as I said, the legislation is clear in terms of what the government should do. The challenge here is government is letting mining companies to get away with not complying with South African laws in terms of mining. Then you find that the same workers, the same former workers, now they become zamazamas. They go back to the same mines because when these companies leave, they leave those shafts open. They don't close them up properly as per the law. They don't barricade them as per the law. Basically, they don't respect any law that is safeguarding the safety and the environmental safety and socio-economic safety of community members that are affected by the operation. So our government is not doing anything in holding those companies to account. Instead, what we see, they launch programs or they launch initiatives that ensures that we end up having 78 bodies who were left to die underground because they were simply poor working class.
Angolan President João Lourenço is in France for a two-day state visit. One of the key issues on the agenda is the conflict between Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo. For more than 3 years, the M23 movement seized large swathes of territory in the east of the DRC. Rwanda denies supporting the M23. French President Emmanuel Macron reiterated his support for Lawrence's efforts as key mediator.
France supports your tireless investment in the Luanda process. The priority in the Great Lakes region must be dialogue and the search for a lasting peace that respects the territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The peace process that you have initiated must continue, and together we solemnly call for the resumption of discussions at the highest level.
And meanwhile, dozens of people have been injured in recent clashes between the Congolese army and M23 fighters. The number of civilian casualties is rising as the conflict heats up and more hospitals are having to deal with gunshot and blast wounds. Emmett Livingston has been speaking to the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Goma.
More and more wounded civilians are turning up in hospital wards across North Kivu, a province in eastern Congo. Conflict between M23 rebels and the army has spiked over the past several weeks across the region, and ordinary civilians aren't being spared. Aid workers are reporting that people are turning up with gunshot wounds as well as injuries from explosions. There are few places to turn for refuge. Although theoretically protected under humanitarian law, hospitals are routinely hit, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. In the regional capital Goma, surgeons are working around the clock to tend to the wounded.
It's really very worrying. At the moment, there are 175 people injured. Usually we have between 20 and 30 admissions, maybe 40 a week. But we've now passed the 100 injured per week mark. So it's extremely worrying, and it shows that the civilian population is being affected, because the number of civilians is increasing all the time, and there are also minors among the injured, with around 10% of affected being children, and that's extremely worrying.
According to the UN, since January, over 100,000 people have been displaced in the Masisi area of North Kivu alone. 2.8 million people have been displaced across the province since the outbreak of the N23 conflict in late 2021, many of them surviving in makeshift camps surrounding Goma. Rwanda backs the M23 and has sent thousands of troops into North Kivu to aid the group. Both the United States and the European Union have condemned the latest round of fighting, as well as Rwanda's support for the M23.
And we know that the whole region is rich in natural resources. Rwanda has identified potential oil wells on its territory for the first time. A study showed 13 potential reservoirs of crude oil in Lake Kivu. Kivu, a lake that Rwanda shares with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Part of Rwanda's energy already comes from that lake, which contains a vast amount of methane. Clément Di Roma reports from Kigali.
After more than 10 years of exploration, Rwanda said this Wednesday that there could be 13 potential oil wells located beneath Lake Kivu, a lake shared with the DR Congo. The announcement was made by the Rwandan Petroleum Board, but the director clarified that test drilling and further studies are needed to determine the exact quantity of oil and the costs associated with its extraction. Lake Kivu is the third deepest lake in the region, and drilling operations could prove to be very expensive there. Private companies are already extracting methane, a toxic and polluting gas abundant in Lake Kivu, which supplies a small portion of Rwanda's electricity. Rwanda and the DRC share Lake Kivu, but their diplomatic relations are highly strained due to the ongoing conflict between the M23 rebel group and the Congolese army in North Kivu. In 2017, however, Kinshasa and Kigali signed a 5-year joint exploration agreement to search for oil in the depths of the lake, but the conclusions and outcomes of this agreement remain unknown at this time.
A few hundred civilians employed by the French army in Senegal gathered on Wednesday to express their concern about the announced departure of the French military base. Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye said he wanted to put an end to its presence in the country in line with his policy of independence and sovereignty, which he has made a priority since his election in April. Lisa Kaminov and Loïc Chalavon have more.
Hundreds of employees and subcontractors of the local French army base attend this meeting in Dakar as they fear losing their jobs with the looming departure of the troops in coming months. Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who came to power last April, promised to deliver sovereignty and independence in the country, announcing the end of all French and foreign military presence on national soil by 2025.
As Senegalese who have always worked for France, we have very mixed feelings. It's very painful all the same. Because after 20 years of working for the army, having to stop everything overnight is not a good feeling for us.
We're asking both nations, Senegal and France, for a social plan. And we expect our country, Senegal, to redeploy all the personnel who are going to lose their jobs.
Between 400 and 500 people are affected, of which 170 are directly employed by the French army. They're asking to be sent to the public sector or given government support to find other jobs.
It's not about taking sides. It's about making the two countries aware that whatever their problem, we shouldn't be the victims of a situation we had nothing to do with.
Negotiations should begin in the coming weeks once the timetable and conditions for the withdrawal of the French army have been determined.
We've been telling you about Kenya, set to co-host the African Nations Championship with Uganda and Tanzania. The tournament has been postponed and will now take place in August instead of next month. The Confederation of African Football explained that the host countries are not ready and their facilities not up to international standards. While Kenya is known for producing world-class athletes, its football scene seems to have a long way to go, as Elodie Cousin and Olivia Vizo explain.
There's a real buzz in Nairobi as the city organises a draw for the African Nations Championship. It's a major first for Kenya. The country has never hosted or participated in such a big football event.
Our sportsmen have a chance to showcase their prowess, which they have never had before. And therefore, going forward, and the kind of preparation that we are going to have to our footballers is going to ensure that we have now teams that can be scouted internationally. And therefore, that is why we are excited as a country.
But the African Football Confederation felt Kenya wasn't ready for the tournament. The country's sports facilities are in need of serious repair. Even professional local teams struggle to find good places to train.
We don't have our own training facility. So, and for any team that want to develop players or rather want to compete at the highest level, then I think that is the first thing that we should always address.
It's a view that's shared by many sports commentators.
We had the draw for the CHAN 2024 that will happen in August.
This poor investment also means it's hard to attract young talent. And Kenyan football just isn't exciting enough, which is slowly driving fans away.
The lack of infrastructure or stadiums that have, let's say, floodlights, like we've had in the last 4 or 5 years, is forcing the fans to go away from the stadium. I would like to see a fan in Kenya going for this tournament, but that can only be done if we've got these stadiums that can host these big-time players, big-time teams.
In the draw, Kenya got placed in the toughest group and will have to face Morocco. They've only got a few months to prove that they can step up their game.
And this concludes our edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching.
But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. Thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
Donald Trump back in the White House. What will this mean for the United States and for the world over the next 4 years? Watch the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States live on January 20th on France 24. Trust is our most precious asset. Every day, around the world, France 24, RFI and Monte Carlo Doualier join forces to bring you free, independent, verified, balanced information that fights manipulation, and in 21 languages. France Média Monde has been awarded the Journalism Trust Initiative Standard, which guarantees the professionalism and reliability of our international news media with a score of 100%. Trust is not automatic. It must be earned and cultivated. Thank you for your trust.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.